The Coffins in Hell, a title as blunt as is chilling, serve as more than mere props. They are, in truth, masterful multi-layered metaphors that operate on several levels, each a carefully constructed commentary upon the human condition. The episode's opening scene, wherein a still-living player is sealed within his coffin, is more than just a depiction of impending physical death. It is a stark and unforgiving metaphor for how society, in its most callous moments, buries individuals whilst they yet draw breath, entombing them within the suffocating confines of debt, poverty, and the cold isolation that becomes their very shroud. The red ribbons, adorning each coffin as if it were some macabre holiday offering, provide a particularly biting commentary on the deceptive nature of our modern world. They reveal how capitalism, with its penchant for packaging the most brutal aspects of its nature in attractive wrappings, beautifies even the concept of death. Just as the game decorates its coffins, so, too, does society disguise its most destructive elements with a false promise of sweetness that merely masks the inherent bitterness beneath. The systematic manner in which the bodies are processed, the coffins moved efficiently along as though they were mere products upon an assembly line, a chillingly precise choreography of human disposal, mirrors the cold calculation of a modern society that processes and discards its failed participants with the same ruthless efficiency. Each coffin, far from representing a person's passing, represents a chilling transfer of value, a 100 million won addition to the prize pool. Thus, death is literally translated into currency, the ultimate devaluation of human existence. The very presence of these coffins, rather than simple disposal of bodies in the manner befitting, say, a meat-packing plant, represents the merest facade of dignity within an inherently undignified system. Is nothing more than performative respect, a meaningless gesture that masks the fundamental disrespect at the very heart of this barbaric enterprise, much like how our own society offers symbolic gestures of dignity while stripping away the actual human worth. And the act of sealing the coffin upon its living occupant becomes a perfect and profoundly disturbing metaphor for how systems of inequality often seal people's fates while they yet struggle to escape. The nails hammering into the coffins lit a chilling parallel for the way debt, social status, and a lack of opportunity can permanently trap individuals, ensuring that their fate is sealed in place as the sound echoes into the surrounding darkness. Thus, the coffin imagery becomes a central metaphor, a chilling centerpiece, for how society, in its most brutal iterations, processes its losers, a veneer of superficial dignity masking fundamental brutality, a systematic efficiency that disguises the true human cost, reminding us of how the system itself is designed not to help the lost, but to exploit them, even in their death. The honeycomb, Dalgona, game, a seemingly innocent childhood pastime turned into a deathly challenge, functions as a brilliant metaphor on multiple levels, revealing the insidious nature of the systems at play. The transformation of a beloved childhood street treat into an instrument of death represents the chilling way in which capitalism corrupts the most innocent memories, and the sweet taste of the candy, a tantalizing reminder of youthful innocence, contrasts brutally with its deadly purpose, a metaphor for how the promise of wealth masks the inherently destructive nature of the system, and the varying difficulty levels of the shapes, circle, triangle, star, umbrella, each a seemingly minor difference, mirror how societal games are rigged from the start, making it all too clear that some are doomed to fail from the beginning. The pretense of choice in the selection of a shape, the illusion of agency, reveals the inherent lie of a system where some choices are so clearly more deadly, a metaphor for the illusion of free choice in our socio-economic mobility, and the brittle nature of the candy, fragile and prone to breaking, becomes a symbol of the precarious nature of survival within modern society, where one wrong move, a single misstep, can shatter not just the candy, but also one's entire existence, much like a single financial setback can destroy a life. And the ticking clock during the game, a constant reminder of mortality's inexorable march, represents the way that poverty transforms time itself into an instrument of psychological torture. The ever-present pressure to complete the task becomes a direct mirror to the relentless demands of capitalist productivity, and the need for surgical precision with crude tools, a mere needle, serves as a commentary on how the poor are often expected to perform impossible feats with woefully inadequate resources. The game, with its seemingly simple rules but cruelly difficult execution, perfectly reflects how society presents a multitude of simple paths to success, whilst rendering them practically unattainable. The use of a children's treat for deadly stakes serves as a heartbreaking representation of how poverty reduces adults to a childlike helplessness, infantilizing the players while simultaneously punishing them with the full force of adult consequences, and forcing them to literally consume their way through the game, licking the candy, as if it were the very means of their own salvation. Symbolizes how the poor must not only internalize, but actively participate in, their own exploitation in order to simply survive. Thus, the honeycomb game emerges as a perfect microcosm, showcasing how capitalism takes what should be pure and innocent, childhood memories and dreams of success, and twists them into tools of torture and death, a stark and brutal reminder of its inherent inhumanity. The voting sequence in Hell, designed to appear as a triumph of democracy, functions instead as a masterful critique of the democratic illusions inherent in capitalist systems, revealing how even freedom can be manipulated and corrupted for sinister ends. The vote appears to be a democratic process, but is, in truth, a carefully crafted tool of manipulation, designed to further the game's cruel purposes and the display of the prize money before the vote. A tantalizing sum designed to sow seeds of avarice, represents how capitalism uses the lure of wealth to influence otherwise free choices, and like modern democracies, this choice is presented only after the system is firmly in place, with no possibility to change its fundamental rules. The vote, then, is nothing more than a mechanism designed to transfer moral responsibility from the organizers to the players, for by making the players choose to return, the game cleanses itself of any ethical culpability, and this mirrors how modern institutions use the concept of personal choice to absolve themselves of the systemic violence they both create and perpetuate. The binary nature of the choice, stay or leave, obscures the far broader and more sinister systemic issues at play, forcing the players to choose between two forms of death: the quick and violent death that awaits them in the game, or the slow, agonizing death that the grinding gears of poverty has promised them in their real life. A perfect metaphor for how modern democracy offers a series of false choices, while cleverly concealing the deeper structural violence at play. The vote makes each and every player complicit in the outcome, forcing them to share the responsibility not only for their own destiny, but for the deaths of their fellow competitors. This mirrors how so many modern systems force participation in their own brutal actions, thereby making each and every one of us complicit in the perpetuation of such a system, and the timing of the vote, carefully orchestrated after the psychological trauma of the first game, and before revealing the full, brutal consequences of the stakes, shows how desperation, pain, and shock can all be weaponized for evil. The use of majority rule, turning each player against his fellow man, becomes a twisted form of peer pressure, and the strategic reveal of the prize money, a tantalizing carrot on a long, dark road, becomes nothing less than a calculated attempt to sway decision-making through avarice. In the end, it is the all-too-predictable return of the players after having voted to leave that ultimately reveals how economic desperation undermines the concept of genuine choice, their return serving only to validate the game's cruel premise that poverty is a form of violence equal to, or perhaps even worse than, the game itself. The formal and ordered nature of the vote, with all the pretense of a fair and just procedure, is just another layer in the deception, masking the fundamental injustice at the very heart of the system. Like our own democratic institutions, this vote provides only the appearance of choice while serving a set of predetermined ends, showcasing how such mechanisms are designed not for true liberty, but for social control, and therefore the vote sequence becomes a perfect metaphor, not for choice, but for how modern systems can create the illusion of agency, whilst ensuring predetermined outcomes through a carefully orchestrated act of economic coercion. The concept of return in Episode 2, a word that should be a harbinger of hope, becomes instead a devastating metaphor, revealing how capitalism functions as a self-perpetuating, inescapable system that crushes all hope for freedom. The players return to the game, once free and now deliberately choosing imprisonment, mirrors that inescapable cycle of poverty, wherein each attempt to escape leads, as if by some cruel destiny, back to the same desperate circumstances, like a cruel and inescapable orbit, poverty's gravitational pull proves impossible to evade. That very conscious decision to return to a place of death and torment becomes a sad and telling commentary on the nature of choice under capitalism, those individuals willingly choosing to return to their own destruction, all in the tragic hope that it's their best available option. This mirrors the way that modern society so often traps people within systems they know to be harmful, their own desires for change being used to keep them bound to the same endless cycle of pain, and the episode's title, Hell, gains a far deeper resonance through this inevitable return, that choice being made because, in the brutal calculus of our world, these players are left only to choose between two forms of hell: the quick, violent death of the game, or the slow, agonizing demise they face living within their poverty. The return itself suggests that a known hell, no matter how brutal, is somehow preferable to an uncertain hell, no matter how enticing the promise of freedom might sound. That return parallels the addiction cycles of so many of us. The valiant attempt to quit, but, eventually, the inevitable return to the thing that destroys. And the game, like capitalism itself, creates its own twisted necessity, for even knowing the deadly consequences, the players return, thereby validating the game's premise, that it offers the best of all possible options. This mirrors how capitalism, in all its twisted glory, self-validates itself through the forced participation of its victims, a system that proves itself to be right through the very desperation it creates. The brief return to the outside world, a fleeting glimpse of the possibility of freedom, serves only to confirm its inherent uninhabitability, and in this way, each character's personal hell, Sang-woo's debt, Gi-hun's family struggles, Sae-byeok's desperate mission, all remain fundamentally unchanged, proving that the outside world is nothing less than another version of the same inescapable game. In the end, the return represents a form of compulsive repetition of trauma, the players returning to the site of their own psychological damage, a mirror for how systemic trauma creates its own repetition, and therefore, that return becomes the ultimate and most haunting metaphor, encapsulating capitalism's self-perpetuating nature, a system designed to create the conditions that ensure its subjects' continued participation. The very concept of hell in Episode 2, that brutal and unforgiving title, operates as a multifaceted metaphor that reveals the infernal nature of modern existence, a layered construction of torment, a grim vision of our contemporary inferno. This episode presents a nested structure wherein each layer of hell contains all others, where the game itself is but an immediate hell. Their personal circumstances create their individual hell, and underlying it all lies that economic system, that all-encompassing societal hell, and what may well be the ultimate, unending torment of modern capitalism itself. Here, the players actively and consciously choose to return to hell, that choice between different versions of it, revealing the painful illusion of free will, that like Dante's sinners, the characters are now, in effect, the architects of their own damnation. The vote is no more than the peculiar democracy of this particular hell, wherein the players are offered the freedom to choose which hell to inhabit, thereby highlighting that freedom to choose one's own hell has become the ultimate modern torture. Unlike the traditional religious notions of hell, here, we witness a purely human-made construction. The game's orchestrators are not supernatural demons but are human beings, thereby implying that this hell is not divine punishment, but purely a human creation. That money becomes both salvation and damnation. Debt, a very real version of eternal torment, and the prize money, a false form of redemption, where the game's organized and systematic nature mirrors the cold logic of our own bureaucratic systems, wherein hell isn't chaotic, but instead orderly and tightly regulated, where rules and procedures are just another way of masking the inherent brutality. Ultimately, this episode illustrates the profound impossibility of escaping from such a carefully conceived hell, for each attempt at liberation leads back to another, equally cruel and unforgiving version, and the outside world is revealed to be another circle in that vast, inescapable inferno. That modern interpretation of hell deviates from traditional religious ones in key aspects, for whereas the traditional notions of hell portray it as a punishment for sin, our modern interpretation shows it as a consequence of systemic design, a carefully orchestrated system of torture. Whilst the traditional notion of hell was one of chaotic suffering, This reveals it as an organized, efficient system, and whilst the traditional hell was one of an eternal, unchanging nature, this hell reveals itself as a dynamic, ever-evolving system. In the end, whereas traditional hell is viewed as one under divine and demonic authority, this shows a hell administered by human and institutional authority. This metaphor, then, serves as a powerful critique of modern capitalism, showing how it creates an inescapable system suffering, which is further enabled through choice rather than force, making its victims complicit in their own damnation. And this modern version of hell, one chosen and created, rather than imposed and eternal, systematic, not chaotic, economic, not moral, human rather than divine, becomes a chilling vision of the world that we inhabit, a world where hell isn't something we go to, but one we've built. Even the symbolism of the butterfly in Episode 2, a traditional emblem of positive transformation, is perverted for the show's chilling designs. That butterfly, made from red ribbon on each coffin, mocks the natural process of metamorphosis, showing that the players don't transform into freedom, but instead into commodified corpses, their aesthetic beauty serving only to conceal the horror underneath. Just like capitalism itself, which packages ugliness in attractive wrappings, this butterfly, or ribbon, becomes yet another form of corporatized symbolism, wherein death is marketed as a beautiful transformation, a false promise designed to sedate and manipulate. If, as tradition suggests, the butterfly represents the soul's journey, here it only marks the final journey to the crematorium. The red ribbon now become a flag of false dignity, a cruel joke played on the dying, wherein flight becomes the final descent into ash. Final analysis: the dark mirror of modern society. Squid Game's Episode 2, Hell, isn't merely entertainment. It is a devastating critique of modern capitalism, achieved through an intricate web of metaphors that capture the very essence of our current existence. The coffins reveal how modern society processes its failures, whilst the honeycomb shows childhood innocence weaponized and sold off to the highest bidder. The vote exposes the brutal and sinister complicity of democracy, whilst the return, with its terrible, inescapable pull, demonstrates the power of capitalism's gravity and the very concept of hell itself, made visible in such stark and unforgiving terms, reveals our world to be nothing less than a human-made inferno, where even the butterfly has lost its beauty, transformed from a symbol of hope to a cruel reminder of despair. And together, these elements create a perfect microcosm, mirroring the contemporary society, where choice becomes a trap, hope becomes a weapon, beauty becomes a mask for horror, play becomes death, freedom becomes prison, and where democracy itself becomes an instrument of oppression. The episode goes so far as to suggest that we already live inside a version of this deadly game, our society just a larger, more subtle version of this same concentrated horror, where poverty, in its slow and insidious way, kills just as surely, where all choices are similarly constrained, and where the illusion of escape does nothing but maintain the system. The true genius of this episode lies in making visible what normally remains hidden: the machinery of social control, the aestheticization of violence, and the sinister methods by which systems of power maintain themselves, all through the twisted and cruelly designed hope they offer to all those seeking escape. By doing so, it holds up a dark and unflattering mirror to our own world, compelling us to finally recognize that we are, in fact, already playing some version of this game, and the question in the end is not just about the character's fate, but about our own complicity in such monstrous systems. How do we truly break free when every potential exit seems to lead us right back into the very same hells? Hark, and let us consider, first, the coffin's mirror, wherein we see reflected not just the cold finality of death, but also a stark truth about the world of men. It is, alas, a metaphor of corporate ladder, where the ascent is but a slow descent into a gilded tomb, a false promise of social mobility that ends, not in triumph, but in a burial of one's very aspirations, a chilling tableau wherein we witness hope's burial, the hope of better things extinguished by the very system that pretends to offer it, and all for naught, for what is dignity's price, but a fool's bargain, wherein our worth is measured by our proximity to power, not our inherent worth. Then let us turn our gaze upon Dalgona's dark mirror, wherein sweetness turns to bitter ashes, where we see innocence's mortality, childhood joy twisted into a tool of death, as fragile as glass, and a cruel parody of the fragility that attends to fragility of choice, where one wrong move can shatter all. And it is, methinks, a most corrupt use of the past, a corrupted nostalgia, a manufactured longing for a world that never truly existed. Oh, what a sorry state! This is nothing less than engineered despair, a system built not on the promise of fulfillment, but upon the very essence of man's desperation. And now, let us descend into the realm of democracy's shadow, wherein the ballot is nothing more than a chain, a choice as chains, binding us to predetermined fate. Behold, a cynical manipulation, manufactured consent, wherein the governed are led to believe that they are in command of their own destiny. But such consent becomes complicity by design, where even good souls become unwilling agents of a corrupt enterprise, and freedom's illusion becomes the cruelest deception of all, leading us, willingly, towards our very demise. What a curious dance we find ourselves caught in, within the cycle of return, an inescapable rhythm, a tragic ballet wherein all attempts to escape are but the prelude to the inevitable descent into poverty's orbit, trapped within the inescapable pull of economic gravity, hell's gravity, wherein free will is a meaningless notion, and the very idea of self-determination has been perverted into a choice's prison, and that the only rhythm they dance to is one of despair's dance, an endless waltz with sorrow itself. And now we find ourselves upon the precipice of hell's modern circles, wherein the hells are stacked one upon the other, a never-ending descent, wherein we become lost inside of societal hell and entangled within the brutal tendrils of economic hell, and within that darkness we seek refuge only to find our own personal hell, until that final despair, game hell, where all are equally damned and chosen damnation, becomes the cruelest deception, where the victims willingly condemn themselves. Manufactured inferno, where pain is a most precise science, and capital's underworld, wherein the souls are naught but commodities, and all is lost and commodified. And finally, we must witness, if we are to learn, metamorphosis of despair, where that which once symbolized hope is twisted into a signifier of doom, where beauty's perversion has taken hold, where loveliness becomes another tool to ensnare, death's decoration, wherein the end is no longer a tragic fact but a marketable commodity, and final transformation becomes not an escape, but the last descent into the ashes of what was.